then they ask some, they do ask some interesting questions here. So vocabulary, any interesting? Anybody want to volunteer a word that they thought was interesting?
There are a lot of like Italian words that you learn.
Oh, the
It's like that mean like the things, but it's like the meaning of what that section is supposed to be.
for like the credits and debits, and they had the whatever the Italian word was for it.
I got one.
Okay.
Admonition.
A- admonition.
Yeah, it's ADMONITION. Admonition. ADMONITION.
There we go. Is that spelled right?
Yes.
Okay. Admonition. So what does it mean?
Be cautious. Well, that's what I mean in dictionary, but when I write my own work is different.
Okay. Be cautious. Is that cautious? Okay. Looks a little bit like the German word for the, I think the same same thing. So anyone else want to volunteer a word before we move on to the
Canons.
how do you spell it?
CANONS.
Like that?
No, the last one. Yeah.
Canons? So what was canons?
It's like general rules, law, principles.
It's not a word we hear often.
Yeah, and it's especially decreed by the church or council.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Anyone else have a word? Those are both good words. Reckon?
RECKON. K.
So what does that mean?
I think it's like record accounts.
Okay. This is all.
I have one.
Okay.
I don't really know if I'm pronouncing this.
Spell it.
PESTILENCE.
Is that right?
Um,
Pestilence?
yes.
Okay, what is
It means an epidemic, and then it like said something about the bubonic plague. Like it's said that.
that's good? Another word that we don't hear very often? Pestilence? Sam?
Acquainted. ACQUAINTED.
They spelled it wrong. that mean?
Background knowledge.
Okay. We'll move on. So what are the necessities of a careful business? So this is the first question out of the book. Bookkeeping's one.
Cash.
Cash.
And you arrange your transactions symmetrically.
Okay. So, sounds good. Anyone else have something? So when we say cash, could we also say capital?
Is it capital?
You know,
I say
so
Capital is mean your equity. You mean cash reserves, but your equity stays.
right.
That's capital.
So I'm just asking the question, you know, because a lot of times in business stuff, they don't talk about cash; they talk about capital. So
It's a combination of the both, is what they said in the book. It's like capital and cash are one of the first necessity. So it's not just capital and it's not just cash, it's a combination.
combination of those, right? So capital probably includes cash, but cash doesn't necessarily include everything that's included in capital. So, but cash really is, when you talk about cash really is king. But I think, and I even think when this was written, cash probably had a different meaning than we think of as cash today. And it was probably more C-A-C-H-E versus the C-H, the C-A-S-H that we talk about. I think probably closer. So, now all of us, so who hasn't taken accounting? Now I haven't taken accounting in quite a while. Who has not taken accounting? Okay. So Benjamin, your answer about the equal, what did you say? The
Equity.
the equity on both sides of the transaction. What do we call that? So
Your debt to credit ratio.
yeah, the debit and credit situation. So when they're talking about the equity, they're talking about in the journals. So we'll talk a little bit about this in the next one. So I'm not even sure exactly the proper word yet. So we'll talk about ledgers and journals. So what is a ledger and what is a journal? What's the difference between the two?
The ledger's going to account for your cash. The journal identifies those cash or those transactions in actual writing forms, so that
Okay.
when you go to do your balances, you have something to say, okay, where did I get this cash from? And on this date, you show your journal where that money or that asset came from.
Okay, this is a good explanation. I'll get out my pen here for this. So, and what's interesting is in the world today, they have, with the software that you deal with, you're going to be making entries into a journal. So if you're in a business, they'll say general ledger. They'll talk about the general ledger, which is the main ledger where all the transactions take place. So you've got we'll put GL here because that's what they call it. And then you've got journals. But in the accounting software, they don't call them a journal, they actually call them an account. So you'll have and the debits and credits always confuse me. But so in the general ledger, we want to keep track of what's going on. So we've got a store out there and it's selling widget A. So out here we're going to have, we'll have a store account. And when you get into these complicated accounting softwares, they'll have sometimes 20 digits in here for whatever this account is. So, but we'll just call this 001 account here. And then you're going to have a cash account over here too. So over here in the store, every time we sell something, we're going to make an entry here in the store. And you'll have to correct me. But it'll go into, so in the store account there'll be a debit side, and we're going to have a credit side. And so, and I should know this better. So we've got a debit side and a credit side here. We also have a debit side and a credit side here. And then over here we have a debit and a credit. And so in all of these accounts, you're going to have these debits and credits. Well, I'll draw the line down here. So, and we'll have this cash account, maybe. We'll have this be 010 for the cash account. So as you make a sale in a store, let's say we sell something for $10, and I can't remember, this may be wrong, but so we put we put a debit in here.
You sold some of it, you actually got a cash debit, because cash is massive.
Sorry.
So you put 10 in there.
So we've got 10 here, but this is right, and then the credit goes over here.
Yes.
Then the credit goes over here. Okay. So this is the way we do it like that. So, but it still hasn't. So we've got the cash in the store account, but it doesn't go into the general ledger until it posts. Like this. So we'll keep doing stuff over here on this side, and if we buy something from the store, then it's going to go into the. So if we buy, let's say we buy 1,000 widgets, so we've got $1,000 debit over here, and there will be $1,000 debit over here. I mean, this is ultra simplified. But these things just keep going on, and then at some point you're going to post all of this information into the general ledger. And then it will make, so when we do that, then it will make reversing entries in these two accounts. So they made this thing really complicated, but this is where they started, and I think that's why they added this into the foundations of business, so you understand as a class where this came from. So this is the ledger, this middle one, and this is going to keep track of all the transactions that are going on. And so as the journals will keep the stuff separately before those get transferred into the general ledger account. And I think, so I'm asking you, so as you're doing these, are there entries going into this general ledger account at the same time too?
I think the general ledger is all of your accounts, and then the journal is where you write each daily transaction. So then the journal will just be the sum of all your different accounts.
So it'll be the sum of the different accounts in here, okay.
And then they'll add up the debits and credits have to be.
Yeah, and then they have to be in balance. So the one thing though is there's always going to be this balance, and this is the balance that Benjamin was talking about with the ledgers and the journals, so that there's some kind of check to say, oh, if we've got some kind of problem somewhere, we can start looking around. And back when you used to have books, it was probably easier to just go look at the book, but now it's in an accounting, you have to go find it in the accounting software someplace. So here we've talked about debits and credits. Explain what inventory is. Who's got a good definition for inventory?
There's a form of documentation that describes all owners' assets or debts or credits that they have on person or at hand at the time.
Okay, so in the book, when it was talking about inventory, this is where you're going through and making an accounting of everything that you own or that you're owed or that you owe to someone. So that's the inventory that they're talking about, which is a different definition from if you have inventory in a store. So the inventory that we're talking about is this making the accounting or making the reckoning of what's going on with your transaction. And it's interesting in this article, this is something that I didn't know before I read the article, that the debits and credits was set up as a way to record kind of your own, because the way that the person in the So the way that the person explained this, and Pacelli, or however you pronounce this guy's name, the way he explained it, it was kind of a way for a person to keep track of all of their transactions. Where today, I don't think too many people, well, at least I don't, there may be people in there that are keeping track, like through this inventory with debits and credits. You know, I get in and I look at my checking account and I say, okay, this is how much money I've got. I get into my balances in my credit cards and say, this is how much I owe, or this is how much I've spent this month. But and if I'm looking to see what my car is worth or what my house is worth, I'm going to get into those separate accounts. But I'm not doing this, and maybe I should be doing this on a more. Now, businesses have to do this, and the reason a business has to do this on a regular basis is if they want to buy money, if they want to borrow money, then they need to have a statement to show, okay, this is where I am at this particular time. This is my history. So, what is a disposition? Anyone have a good definition or explanation of disposition?
Where was that again?
What?
Because I didn't put the questions on here, so I don't remember.
Is there a way to go into our answers, the ones that we've submitted already?
Yeah, you just go into Canvas and you just click on the assignment.
Because I just did, and it only pulled up the assignment, not the answer.
Okay, well, because I'm in there right now, that's how I'm looking at mine.
That's a good question.
You just go into assignments and
I
then
want to see it.
you just, so you, it's on here and you just go into assignments,
Oh, at the very bottom.
maybe. And then you just,
Oh,
maybe
okay,
you
I
go
see.
in it.
Did you
Yeah, I
find
got
it?
Yeah.
Maybe it's in, oh yeah, you go into grants, sorry.
Do you go into grades?
Yeah, you go into grades, well that's what I did, and then you click on it.
Yeah, because that's the way I get in. Is I go into grades, and then I look through the grades. So I look at the grades, and then I click on the assignments, and it shows me what everyone's answers are. So, what is disposition? What is a disposition? Arrangement. It's interesting in the accounting that when because I do a lot of automation of stuff, and a lot of times it's the bank, the reconciliation comes in, and then I go through, and when the bank reconciliation comes in, I automate the process of reconciling checkbooks. And so it's always, the disposition in there is so as it comes in, the disposition is when it says, okay, it's going into the debit account or it's going into the credit account, that's the disposition. So is it the same in the book that they define it, or when you look it up, is it the same way? Because it's, at least in my definition of disposition, when I looked it up, I actually didn't even look it up. I mean, I read the article, but I didn't even look it up for this, because this is the way I understand it, is when these are filled out.
So it's like a check and balance?
It's the check and balance process. Well, so when the check, so they've got all this money in their cash account, because every day they're getting a transaction from a store. So most of the time it's from stores, and they'll have all these deposits coming in from the stores, and then they need to reconcile it with it needs to be reconciled with the GL and with the store account. So they've got it, so it's in cash already, and they need to match up with the GL and the store account, and that's when they call it the disposition. So you click, well, for me, I click down, and that's where it's either posted into a credit account or a debit account. So it's kind of the disposition that I see are when those post into the accounts. So, and I don't know if it was something different, because I read through this, and for the first several, it didn't give a specific place in the, I think we're supposed to look them up. And so, why should inventory begin with an oath? How many of you ever worked with a store that did inventory? Did they ever have you do an oath before you do inventory? This is what when they asked this question, I understood in the context of this article why there was an oath, but I was wondering if when they did inventory, they had everybody give an oath that they were going to do this the most correct way possible. And I would assume that they, especially at this point, they would probably give the oath, have everybody give an oath at the beginning. But,
Especially also because he's in a church too.
right.
Was the other thing, is the fact that he's a friar. So.
Yeah, I think this is part of why. But then we have the general accepted.
I was just gonna say, we're kind of talking about taking homes before taking their inventory. I've worked in a lot of jobs where, in restaurants where the inventory is part of what you do. You have to know what product you have before you're gonna sell it, especially before you become busy. And I think there's kind of an unsaid oath because if you're not honest with your inventory, especially like in a restaurant situation, you're end up going to screw yourself over. Because if you say you have so much of this and then you don't, you're going to be regretting lying or doing it wrong later. And so it's almost like they may not take an actual oath, but there's almost an unsaid oath to doing inventory that I'm going to do this the most correct I can, just for simplicity later.
So I think this is a good point, because I was going to bring up the general accepted accounting principles, GAAP stuff, and the reason that we're supposed to be held to a higher standard, and here we're talking about inventory, but with accounting in general, which is what we're talking about, and why they started off with an oath, because if you're not honest about it, it's going to screw stuff up later. So anytime somebody's trying to cook the books of a business, eventually they're going to get caught because
Enron, was it Enron that could fake the books, their accounting books, make those like corporations? It was Enron, yeah.
yeah. So it was Enron. Now Enron was doing there needs to be a little bit more understanding of the way, because Enron was dealing with utilities, and so like for instance, for us, when we look at our power bill, they charge us basically the same every day. But I don't know if you realize that there's a wholesale market out there that fluctuates. There's incredible fluctuation in electricity prices. And so if that was happening to us, we'd all freak out, because one month we might get a bill and it might be $2,500 for our electricity, and the next month we used half as much electricity and it's $10. Seriously, there's that much fluctuation in the price of electricity on the wholesale side. And so what Enron was doing was Enron was trying to play the fluctuations, but they wanted to look like a stable company, so they created these companies on the outside where they could take the losses or the gains without it showing up on their real books. So they'd set these companies up that would take all the fluctuations, but pretty soon they had all just gone the wrong way on all of these extra companies, and Enron had nothing to do but, eventually it came out in the wash, and they really didn't have the assets.
Is it illegal to?
Oh yeah, it's totally illegal what they were doing.
Like to try to play the. I guess
It's not illegal to play. It's not illegal to play the fluctuations, but it is illegal to try to hide that. So they had these companies, these shell companies that were set up on the outside that were.
So in essence, what they were doing was they were trying to tell people that we're just giving you the wholesale price, when in actuality it may be a lot more than the wholesale price, and then try to essentially make the profit off when they could be at the top of the fluctuation.
Right. So So what they were doing is they would create a company out here, and so this company would invest in electric futures. So, I mean, the way that oil futures, like if you look at the price of oil today, like if you look anywhere and it says the price of oil is $48 a barrel, what that really means is the price, that $48 a barrel. So I bought a contract in 3 months to buy a barrel of oil for $48. And so or maybe it's only a 1 month contract. So when those prices, it's actually not the price of oil, it's the price of the opportunity to buy the oil in a month. And so what they were doing with the electric futures is they would say, okay, I'm going to buy, 1 million kilowatts of electricity in a month for 10 cents a kilowatt. And so with that contract, so if the prices go up, let's say it goes up to 20 cents, and they've bought a million kilowatt hours, and it goes up to 20 cents, then what they do is they actually sell their contract. So they can sell their contract for maybe they sell it for 19 cents. So they made 9 cents on on the million kilowatts that they sold. So that's what they were trying to do. But the problem is, if it goes the other way and all of a sudden a kilowatt hour is 1 cent in a month, then they're not even going to exercise their option to buy that. They're just going to take the loss. And instead of taking the loss directly on their own books, they would take it on these other companies. Well, when all the other companies were just completely upside down, they couldn't feed cash back into Enron. And that's when Enron got caught. Because as long as it's almost like a Ponzi scheme, but it's not quite like a Ponzi scheme. But so companies who were taking those risks that stuff needs to show up in these transactions. And if it's not, at some point it's going to have to show up. And I guess they assumed that, we can do this. We can set up all these companies and build the buffer, and it looks like Enron's doing really great, when the accounting guys were just hiding all that stuff. But you're right. If you're not going to be honest about it, eventually it's going to come back. So, do you understand what a Ponzi scheme is? Does everyone understand what a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme is, so I go, So I go to my brother and I say, hey, can I borrow $100 from you? I will return like 20% on your investment. And so I spend all of his money. And I go to my other brother and I say, hey, can I borrow $100? Or can I borrow $120 from you? And so then I go to my brother and say, hey, look, I made 20%. I've still got your $100. Here's $20. I'll give you $20. You know, that's the interest you made. But now I owe. So I've actually borrowed money from one guy to pay another guy back. And the Ponzi scheme is you just keep borrowing money from people and spend a little bit. And so the one guy who'd been doing it for years, what was his name? Can't even remember his name. But he was doing it for years, and he would return enough of an a return to people that it wasn't exorbitant amounts of money. And so he would, 10, 12, 15% return on their money. But eventually there's just all this vacuum that's created in there, and eventually it will suck out, just like with Enron. And so you're right about the honesty. It needs to be, I think that's why the oath is important with this, is because as you do the inventory, it needs to be as honest as possible so that you don't get caught, because you will get caught in your lie. So then the last thing is, explain the difference between personal property and real estate.
Personal property items, like how it says, like linen, bed sheets, stuff like that.
Right.
Cash and diamonds and whatnot. And then real estate is like more land. Like,
So I would say real estate is land.
yeah.
Something else that I learned is that personal property you can lose. You can't lose like a house, or you might lose it if you were not a good investor, but not like
Right.
lose it out of sight.
Can be stolen.
Yeah, and so I think that's a good definition. Real estate is not going anywhere. Personal property can walk off with itself.
I was going to say, it might have more to do with maybe the land, because houses can be destroyed
Yeah.
and then
Right.
you're out the cost of the house, but you still own the land.
You still own the land.
You can still sell the land for a profit.
So a house may even be considered personal property. That's an interesting.
I guess, yeah.
So
Because
real estate could. So that's an interesting. The building on the land, is that real estate? I would consider that real estate, because that's the real estate market, but it's really the land that the building's on. That's an interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty.
if you think about it, all the value of a house, just the location, just the spot of land that house is sitting on can change the value so much. You look at something in downtown Salt Lake versus out in Harriman, the value of that piece of property is going to be so different for the same two houses. It's
True.
the same floor plan.
Right. Yeah, and then there's other crazy things. Like if you've been to St. George, so I don't know if you've been to St. George or not, but in St. George there's an exit right off. There's the main exit in St. George. There's several more main exits now, but there used to just be one main exit. And so when I was in college in 1991, an acre of property right on that exit was worth $6 million for an acre because of the commercial value just right there. The McDonald's and everything is right in that area, so you're just going to make a lot of money if you have that piece of property. Just like you're saying, it's the location of the property. But that's the real estate and personal property. I hadn't really thought about that much before, but so that's it for the discussion today, unless someone else has something they want to bring up. So I'll give you the rest of the time to get together with your groups, see how you're going to get that worked out.